The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg is in the room. Everyone step aside.
Yes, I'm the one standing with my hand. I'm going, remember me? See me? Pay attention to me.
No, Mr. Espionage himself.
Yeah, Mr. Wonderful.
Yeah, well, somebody's got to do it here.
I'm just that person.
Yeah, you're here for you are the eye candy for the group.
Is that it? Is that my role?
Yeah,
I'll tell my wife and my kids that.
Yeah, you're the sex symbol for the whole show. It's the only reason you're here. We don't need.
What a lousy show.
Well, tastes have changed over the years, so
that's true.
Maybe you're in style now, so take advantage of it.
Guys from the Midwest, yeah.
Yeah, because as soon as that ends, as soon as you're out of fashion, you're off. Just so you know.
Sad.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah. Well, speaking of in fashion, we've got a great writer here. So let's just bring him in. His new book's called Deep Fake, a thriller. Mr. Ward Larsen, thank you for being here.
Howdy, thanks for having me.
Ward, you've been pretty successful. You've been doing this for a little while now, and it seems like you've had a pretty good run. How do you keep things going, over a period of years when you're writing this type of a book, like a thriller, espionage, this sort of a book? How do you keep it fresh?
Well, it has been a long time. I think this is my 15th book, and I never really saw that coming. When I wrote the first one about 20 years ago, the time has really flown past. But I've never had trouble coming up with the next big idea. I mean, I do one main series, my David Slayton Assassin series, but this is a standalone book. And really, everything I do is contemporary, and all you have to do is read the papers, watch the news every day, and you can get plenty of good ideas for the next story.
Do people really believe in a lot of this? They must, right? Because how do I say this? There's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on a lot of these books. How do you keep it so that people find it believable, but yet on the edge, sort of? You know what I mean?
Well, reality seems pretty on the edge sometimes if you follow what's going on in the world. I've never really had any readers, it's escapism, no doubt. Everybody expects that. But I've never had anybody, rarely, that say, I just couldn't believe that happened. And, there are some pretty extreme things that happens in my books. But it's, that's kind of expected in this kind of book, in a thriller, that you really kind of press the edge of what could be.
So in this one being a standalone rather than a series, what do you like doing better?
I do this series, and I'll just tell you from a business standpoint, series are probably the way to go for a writer, but it's really nice to refresh yourself by doing something a little different, by backing away from what you're doing year in, year out. And do a standalone now and again. And I've been very fortunate. My publisher allows me to do that. This book was actually born out of COVID in a way. I still have a day job. I fly for an airline right now, and have for many years. And during COVID, the airlines offered a time off program where we could just stay home for partial pay and just not come in. And you couldn't go out anywhere to do anything a couple of years ago. So I just stayed home and wrote for 11 months straight. And I wrote 2 books and a novella, and Deep Fake was one of those books.
Well, let's go with that. You've had the one big series, the Slayton series, and the Jammer Davis series, and the standalones. And you say you read the papers for the plot. Do you start with the plot when you're doing your series, or do you start with your character who's well developed when you're going to the next book?
Well, when you're in a series, of course, you have to kind of design it around the character, where you left him last time, and then pick up from there. But the actual plot, generally, I just get ideas from the headlines or from things I read about technology. I subscribe to some periodicals, a lot of aviation-related stuff, and I get ideas from that. My most recent 2 Slayton books, what I've done for the first time is I've tied 2 books together where they kind of follow on, where it's sort of a continuing plot for 2 straight books. The rest of them are all pretty much where you can read one and then it's completely different the next time. But I have my most recent 2 books that came out last year, Assassin's Edge, and one coming out later this year, Assassin's Mark, are tied into basically the same plot, a continuation of.
Did you like that?
I'm neither here nor there. It worked, and it gave me some fuel to go for 2 books, so that was good. And going forward, I got to come up with something new. But I don't have any doubt that I'll find something.
Yeah. See, I got the series, and I tied the 2 books together, and I found myself going, boy, I need to answer those questions. I got people who are looking for those. Do you think about the reader and asking those questions as you're putting these books together, especially if you have 2 that are tied together?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, people are going to tie those together, but I think you don't want to take it too far where you have to read the books in sequence, because it's very often that the readers, see your most recent book and they've never read your stuff and they want to, start it, but they say, well, do I have to go back and read book 1? Because now that I'm on book 10 in the series, that's a big ask. So I try not to get them too much where they have to be read in sequence or things won't make sense. So that's why I do it that way, is because people read them in very odd orders, whatever they can find at the library, whatever's on sale on Kindle, and you don't want to take that away.
How do you think the spy thriller genre has changed over the last 20 years that you've been writing it?
Definitely technology has become, more of a factor. Just the things that government organizations, organized crime, and intelligence agencies can do and see and manipulate now. It's changed very much. I look back at my first book, which again I wrote 20 years ago, and just back then things like cell phones. Cell phones are not really a thing, smartphones, and that didn't exist in that first book, so it kind of dates it a little. So definitely technology has changed. And I think the world has become a little bit more of a lawless place in certain corners, which is good for thriller writers. You've got, the Wagner Group in Africa that's, basically imposing itself on countries and areas and populations, which is basically just an organized crime syndicate. And, there's a lot of fuel there, and certain things like that maybe didn't exist, 10, 20 years ago.
Well, then how do you do your research, especially if you're locked up for 11 months during COVID? What do you do from 20 years ago that's different than you do now for the research for your books? Because there's a lot of good detail and a lot of atmospherics, and the places are important.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I do travel some to support the books, but I don't always write about places where I've been. I usually write about places. I'll have been to places like that if I write about a certain venue. But really, a lot of it's online research too. You can get so much from online research these days, and once you've been doing it for a few years, in the vein of writing as I have been, you kind of get better and more efficient at it. So you can really come up with some good, as you say, atmospherics for it. And plot point details. You can do translations into local words and languages and things like that. And it's very helpful.
Well, how do you decide? There's so many crimes and there's so many things going on in the world. Like you say, every day you can look at the paper or go on the internet, and there's just so many things going on. And there's more lawlessness, as you sort of said. How do you decide what you're going to put into a book or have it involved in what you're writing?
It's sometimes things just click with you, and it's hard to say exactly why. And I think as a reader, the same thing. Certain books, certain plots kind of click with you and stick with you. I think Deepfake was probably born, and I didn't even realize at the time, but out of the last presidential election, there was just so much coverage of it. And there was so much talk about, the candidates, and it really made me think, about how well we know these people. And, it's interesting, this plot I have in Deepfake, where we have a candidate who all of a sudden becomes a serious presidential candidate who we really don't know a lot about, and who his wife may not know as much about as she thinks. And it struck me that the most recent election, George Santos in New York, he's a guy who got elected to Congress out of New York, and turns out that very little of what he said about himself was true. And so I think it kind of that stuck with me a couple of years ago when I started writing Deepfake, and I think it is reiterated in this most recent election. How well do we know these people?
I heard that he wrote all of Ward Larsen's books.
Yeah. I heard he wrote Deep Fake. That's what it's on his resume.
I heard he's the first man on the moon, too.
Yeah. Well, how do you then treat those sensitive topics? Deep Fake is a political book set in Washington, D.C. Do you leave things out? Do you self-censor yourself as you're thinking, oh boy, I don't want to offend, I can't use that, or I don't really care, I'm going forward, or you find that middle ground?
Yeah, I mean, the politics is very touchy, and basically, he is on the Republican Party because I had to choose a party. But other than that, I don't get into policy. I don't get into specific names or personalities. I stay away from anything that's going to be a hot point. And still, I know somebody is going to write me a letter and say, "You should have made him a Democrat," or something like that. Sometimes you just can't win. But I just did my best throughout the book, and a lot of it's when you're editing, you kind of go back and you see things you wrote originally and go, maybe I can tone that down, or maybe I can take that a little farther. So, the rewriting is part of it as well.
Well, I guess the way, without really getting into politics, but I guess the way that politicians have behaved in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years or so, that must change the way or influence the way you write your characters. It's got to have some sort of impact, because you can say things about, let's say, Trump, or even about, the Santos, any of those people that do kind of unusual things in the public. And that's something that you never dealt with before 2015-16. So, before that, you might have said, oh, that's unbelievable. But now, so does it loosen up the way you have your characters behave?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the center points of this story is that this individual, Bryce Ridgeway is his name in the book, the character, he kind of becomes famous overnight. He's a first-year congressman, and an event comes up where he really becomes a sensation. And it really is driven by the internet, by social media. And the degree to which our politics are driven by social media has really changed the whole landscape. And again, it's what is real and what's not. I mean, the title of the book, Deep Fake, is not directly related to the plot, but I think it serves as kind of a metaphor for, can you believe what you see? I think a lot of you've probably seen, and I know a lot of listeners have, there was a couple of videos relating to deep fake. If you Google Tom Cruise and deep fake, you'll see a video of Tom Cruise. And it's him. Did you guys see this one?
Yeah, I teach this. I teach misinformation
and
deep fakes, yeah.
Okay.
I use them.
Yeah, well, then you know what I mean. And it's a video of Tom Cruise, but it turns out it's not real at all. It was all computer generated. And it really, where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years when anybody with a decent computer and a little bit of education can make a video about anybody saying anything that looks perfectly convincing? I mean, it's scary stuff. I don't know if we as humans are wired to understand what, our perceptions being altered so.
Yeah, and it's kind of unusual, the way the world's changing and right in front of us. I think it's going to be a big adjustment for us as it goes, period, How do you put your own experiences into these books? Because you were a jet fighter, and you've had quite a history with the U.S. Air Force and things like that. Does that really get into the book?
This book in particular, there's not much flying in it. Usually in my other books, The Spy Throwers, I usually weave some flying into the books. I had an earlier Jammer Davis series that were very flying-centric and aircraft accident investigation type, whodunits. But this one, not so much. But yes, I usually do work flying into it. When I was in the Air Force, I went through their accident investigation school, which, is where you basically the military does its own accident investigations versus the NTSB, who does civilian accident investigations. So I really learned a lot out of that. It was very interesting stuff. It's sort of a police procedural type thing. And a lot of my flying stuff experiences do work their way into my books, although they're not really centered around that.
Hey, Ward, do you ever just get jammed up? I mean, it's just, you've written a lot of series, you got characters, you're doing your standalones, you just kind of go, I I know what I want to say. I don't know how to say it. I just need to back off. Or what do you do? Or do you get sort of like writer's fatigue, I guess?
I wouldn't say for the long term. I've had moments here and there where you're sitting behind the computer and you just say, I got to get away from this. And I think I mentioned that, deep fake writing it as a standalone was a bit of therapy for writing that same series, every year for, 4 or 5 years running. I had written an assassin book. So, but I haven't ever just hit a wall where I just couldn't go on other than just a momentary thing.
How do you experience your characters? Like, and I ask that because a lot of fiction writers will say all sorts of things. Like, they'll see them like a movie. They hear voices. They're considered like family or friends or children. I hear it all. How is it for a spy thriller writer like you?
I've heard that kind of thing before, where people kind of are dreaming in his persona and things like that. I've not hit that point. To me, I almost view it as like a reader. It's a character in a story, and I try to keep him true to what he's been doing, to some ideals and what he's felt for many years. He's got a family now in a long running series, which kind of complicates things a bit. And, I think it certainly, reflects on my own experiences, but, I wouldn't say that I have, associated that closely with the character that I'm really putting myself in their shoes, because that would be a little tough.
And so outlining, do you outline your books? I guess you must when you're doing the series. You must have some sort of a plan or a way of keeping track of your characters and how they change through the series. But are you a big outliner?
No, not at all. I tried it once and it just didn't work for me. I ended up spending more time on the outline. I think it was on my second or third book, and it didn't work for me. I'm one of those pantsers, they call them. I don't know what the percentages are, but a good number of writers, I kind of have an idea of where I'm headed near the end, and then I just start with page 1 and start writing, and that's the only way I can do it.
I'm half and half. I have a piece of paper here with lots of stickies on it, different colors, so I can't see the story in my. I got certain points I'm writing to. Do you do that? You say, I know I want this character to do this at some point, so I'm going to write to that point. And then I got another one in the future, so I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm just going to write to that point. Or you really just wide open? Do you know your end, sort of?
I'm pretty wide open, but it does create some problems, because sometimes you got to look back and remember what you'd written, 2 months ago, 50 or 100 pages ago. So, the outline, I could see there are situations where it would help to keep things organized. And again, usually when you reread the book for the first time and do a rewrite, you hopefully catch those things that don't quite mesh, that don't quite make sense. But, I think every writer, once you've written 2 or 3 books, you kind of get in a flow where, you do things your way. And I've seen, walls full of sticky notes that other people use. I've seen, outlines that are virtually as long as the book itself. I basically consider my 100,000 word manuscript as my outline. And then I start rewriting from there, because I do a lot of rewriting. So, that's kind of how I approach it.
Do you know how it's going to end? Or is that also just something that happens?
Yeah, I pretty much always know how it's going to end, except, the basic end of it, yes, I always know that. Usually there's some kind of plot point at the end. I want to bring it to some climax.
The old cliche, writers write and writers read. Do you read inside the genre? Or what do you read to help build your sort of imagination as you're going to write your books?
Yeah, usually when I do read, I read inside the genre. I read Mark Greenier or Orphan X or something like that.
Joe Goldberg.
Yeah, and the problem I have is just finding time to write, because I'm still flying, not quite full time, but I fly for an airline, and I'm writing 2 books coming out this year. So just finding the time to read is my challenge. I actually drive a couple hours a week, usually getting to and from the flying job, and I do audiobooks going to and from that. So I listen to about 1 a month of those. And so I usually get in the latest Michael Connelly, that kind of thing.
If you go out of the genre, where do you go? Do you like Ben McIntyre or that?
I like nonfiction. I read I do some, Eric Larsen, some historical nonfiction. Read a book called The Aviators by Winston Groom, of all people, not long ago. It's very interesting. Of course, with my background, I kind of like the aviation theme. But I like some historical nonfiction.
Did you have a favorite character that you've written?
That I've written? Well, of course, I'd have to say David Slayton, the hero of all my books. He's served me pretty well. I sometimes have a lot of fun with the minor throwaway characters. A lot of times, the bad guys who come and go and often don't meet a good end. But I think in my last book, I had a Serbian warlord who met an untimely end. But it's just fun to kind of create those people, especially if you know they're going to get off at the end.
Yeah. Well, do you have a problem getting into the heads of the evil character in the book, the person that's doing bad things?
I wouldn't say a problem, no. It's, again, reading the news, you read about some pretty evil people, evil things in the news, and you can kind of adapt those things. To me, Russian oligarchs with their yachts and all that, it's fun to play with that. And it's not too hard to kind of think as they would think, I'd say. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I love my minor characters and my bad guys. They're so much more fun than my lead characters. But I agree with that. I think if you can find somebody, I always try to find a real person to base especially my bad characters on. Because if you don't, people go, oh, it's cliche. Oh, it's the bad Russian oligarch. Oh, it's the crazy Chinese drug guy. Yeah, well, they exist. This is
right,
and that's what fiction is. Where it's I'm going to explore fiction and make it as close to reality as you possibly can. To give you that escapism. That's probably where I kill myself the most, is trying to find those little references to real life where people can go, I can believe that. Rather than going, oh, head slapping, unbelievable, jump the shark moment.
And it's hard to come up with both plots and bad guys and good guys that haven't been done before. In the thriller genre, there's only so many ways you can put the world at risk, and it's hard to come up with angles that haven't been done, many, many times.
Yeah, exactly.
$1 million.
Yeah, I kill you, you kill me.
Yeah. Well, and do you kill off people you really in real life? Bad people? Do you ever do that?
Calling him a murderer. You seem to be a murderer. Is that
no? In your books.
Are you killing people off in real life?
Yeah. Are you killing people? Are you doing this in real? No. I mean, I said in your books. We've talked to other people before that have said they've had people in their lives or someone that's cut them off in traffic, and they use that person as a character, and they always sort of have a bad ending.
By name?
Well, no, they'll change the name, but use their characteristics, who they are as a person, and kind of why they might have bad behavior or something like that. So
I've never done that consciously, but probably subconsciously I have. I went back and looked at it in that vein.
I think we had Tara Moss kill her college professor. Is that who did it? Yeah, she hated the guy.
One book. If someone's never heard of you before, what one book would you tell them to pick up to find out who Ward Larsen is as a writer?
I think I wrote a book called Assassin Silence, and it was the third book in the David Slayton Assassin series. And I just always kind of had a liking of that one. I like how the book began, and it just seemed to come together well. So I think if I was going to give a book to somebody and try to sell them on the series, that's the book I would give, and there's Assassin Silence. And I also did another one, a standalone. The last standalone I did was called Cutting Edge, and I thought that was a fun book to write.
Yeah.
It had an interesting premise. I don't know if you've ever heard of a company called Neuralink, owned by Elon Musk. This book came out about 5 years ago, but that's kind of where I got the idea, was this company Neuralink, and it started right before I started working on this book. It's the whole purpose of this company is mind web interface. That's what they do. They put out a video last year, I think it was, of a monkey playing Pong using nothing but his thoughts. And this stuff is really right around the corner. And what it basically, in the book, as I put it together, I had a Coast Guard rescue swimmer who was in an accident up in Alaska, a young guy, and he wakes up and he's injured and he's all beaten to heck. and he is in a cabin in coastal Maine, and he has no idea how he got there. And there's one nurse taking care of him, and slowly he kind of gets brought back to health over the course of a few weeks. And then one night he's out on the beach, and he just happens to be away from the cabin, and he sees men approaching the cabin, and they raid the cabin and kill the nurse, and they're obviously looking for him, and he runs away, and he managed to escape. But within the first few chapters, what he begins to realize is he has the ability to connect to the internet just through his thoughts, and he has a little screen in his eye where he can read things, get information, and he's trying to figure out what it is he's capable of doing. And basically, without giving too much away, he has mind web interface as part of a government program. He was designed as an experiment. Basically, they didn't think he would survive, and they did some surgical procedures on him. And it's sort of almost like a born identity thing where he did lose his memory, but he has this new capability, and he has no idea what he can do. And he goes through this whole book trying to figure out what's been done to him, what he's capable of, all while people are trying to chase him down and get rid of him.
Well, that's a plot with someone would say, "Oh, far-fetched," but you know what? You're there, right?
Everything I use in this book is either being experimented with today or already exists. Cochlear implants, retinal implants, it's all there. It makes you wonder, where are we going to be in 20 years, and how are we as humans going to deal with, the rate of change with technology?
Well, that's actually a good question there is, are you continuing as you write your series or your standalones, looking out for those things, saying, I need those who wrote about Ukraine getting attacked by Russia in several books? They're like, they predicted the future in some sense. Are you going to go that way at all? Is it pretty much going to be based in what's happening now?
I'm trying to look forward, and again, it's the actual books, the stories tend to be smaller scale, not so much broad wars of that's sort of the backdrop of the books, but that's not really the meat and potatoes of chapter to chapter. So it's more smaller things that kind of creep in. Brad Taylor, who writes thrillers very well, he had a thing in one of his recent books. His team it's a military, assault team, top secret and all that. But they were trying to figure out they had a villa, I think it was, they were going to raid, and they wanted to see what the layout inside the villa was. They wanted to know, a map of the rooms. And they were able to, through hacking, figure out that there's a Roomba in this place, and the Roomba actually, as it goes around and cleans, it maps out the interior of the house. So they were able to get a perfect map of the inside of the house, including where the furniture was, based on the Roomba.
I'll shoot my Roomba right now. I'm tossing my Roomba out the window.
No, I've heard that when I got it. That was the big, don't buy a Roomba. They'll know where how your house is. Stuff
like that. I mean, it's so backdoor, but it actually exists. It's out there. It's happening. People can find these things out, especially when you talk about the government, who has unlimited ability, the NSA, to get into signals, to get into electronics like that. Their hacking is virtually unlimited, and that's, it's pretty scary to think about, but it also can be useful to characters in the book if they have access to that information. So what makes a good book to you? What is it that you like about a certain book? Like what characteristics? I'm real taken by good storytelling, and there are certain authors to me that have just the prose. I'm still, maybe it's old school, maybe it's not as, it's a little passé right now, but I really like, the old Frederick Forsyth, and, Daniel Silva's a really lovely writer. I like how he just phrases things, and I really am taken by, good prose, just attractive prose that's easy on the eye, easy to read.
Let me back up even further than that, Ward. You're in aviation, your career. Why do you write? Why become a writer? Where'd that come from?
Good question. I've always been a reader, and I've never met a writer that wasn't a reader first. And I never took any writing courses in college beyond freshman English. I never went to writing groups. It never even dawned on me to become an author. But when I was with the airlines, I had a fair amount of time on my hands, and I was reading a good number of thrillers, and I think I read a particularly bad one day, and it just kind of set it aside and go, well, I could do better than that. And I don't remember who it was, honestly, and I just started playing with it. I just got
Joe Goldberg.
Yeah. Say it. Go ahead. I was reading my. Bryce, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So I just got a laptop and started pecking away, and the first one took many years to get through, but just wanted to see if I could do it, and I did. And I just sort of got published out of the blue. It wasn't really any big master plan, and I was still flying for the airline, so I had a comfortable day job, but I had enough time on my hands where I could write. And once I got the first one out there sold, they said, "Well, where's the next one?" I was like, "Gee, I don't know. I guess I'll have to work on that." So I wrote another one, and it's for the last 15 years, it's been a book a year ever since.
And the most difficult thing in those years for the person who's writing has another real career, what's been the challenge?
It's to do well. I think it's time consuming, and I think Joe would probably second me on this. I don't quit your day job expecting to make a living out of writing. You have to have you have to find the time for it. It's basically I'm at pretty much 2 full-time jobs, and that won't be there forever. I probably won't fly for too many more years. But, the writing I can do forever. And as to why I do it, I think it's nice to have a thought that, after you're gone, which, we all will be someday, that you leave something behind, maybe some stories behind. And
yes.
20, 30 years, somebody's going to see a tattered book sitting on a shelf and pick it up and enjoy it. Say, yeah, that's a pretty cool story. So that's part of it.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I've heard that from other authors too. In fact, it is what drives me, sort of not to be forgotten. Having something on the shelf that the grandkids and great-grandkids can go, hey, I know that guy. In fact, I signed a book to my grandkids and said, all these things said, don't forget me. And I put the book on their shelf.
Yeah, it's a legacy, a little bit.
Do you have a subtext? Do you have a theme or a meaning that underlies the book when you write it, even if maybe it comes out organically, not planned?
I wouldn't say there's some greater moral theme. I think the lessons I might try to impart are usually smaller scale and usually have to do with justice, getting what you read kind of thing. But going in, no, I don't design it around some great moral compass or structure. I think Jack Carr does that a little bit with his series. I've noticed he really gets into the bit about, that our leaders are failing us, on the national and maybe senior military level. And he definitely has a little bit of an agenda going on. And it works for him. It's fine, and I get where he's coming from. But I don't think I really do that.
What do you hope a person gets out of the book after they read it? Is it just entertainment?
Really, yeah. I hope they just get a little escapism, a little entertainment. I hope because that's as a reader, that's what I want. I wanted just a book that I can kind of lose myself in and learn some things. I would like them to learn a few things. And so I do, do some research with that in mind. But basically, enjoyment is the big thing.
Yeah. What do you get out of a book when you write it?
Good question. I mean, definitely there's a sense of self-satisfaction. I'm not doing it for the money. I mean, I'm an airline pilot. I do okay. It's really more just, the satisfaction of being able to write a story. You meet a lot of really interesting people as you're doing your research and in the publishing industry. There's a lot of very cool people. I go, and I know Joe does as well, to Thriller Fest and BoucherCon, some of the big conferences for writers, and it's really nice mingling with the other writers. There's some very interesting people with interesting backgrounds.
Hey, Ward, have you ever thought of getting out of genre? I want to write the great American novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, or is it pretty much you're going to stay in this type of book, this espionage-themed thriller series?
I've thought about it, yeah. I mean, I read the occasional literary book. I read Gentleman in Moscow not too long ago.
Great book.
And that's, it's such a great book. And it's just, you say what the story is, if you're on a radio show, well, the story's about a guy who gets stuck in a hotel in Moscow.
Yeah. For his entire
life.
life.
It doesn't sound much of the story, but the writing is so good, I wish I could write like that. And would I like to try someday? Yeah. But if I went to my publisher with that, they'd probably say, nah, probably not. There is a market. You have to, that's the thing as writer, once you get into a certain genre, once you get a certain reputation, then that's what your readers will expect. That's what your publisher will expect. And it's hard to get out from that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you put yourself in that position, and, I enjoy the books that I write. But, occasionally I dream, wouldn't it be nice if I wrote that great literary novel or something like that?
Typecast as a writer.
Now, do you have a website, and are you social media friendly? Do you like readers to interact with you? How do people find you?
Yes, absolutely. Ward Larsen is WARDLARSEN. I'm not an ON, I'm an SEN. Ward Larsen on Facebook. You'll find me on Twitter. I'm on there quite a bit, and it's wardlarsen.com.
Oh, fantastic. Of course, we'll have that up on our website as well. Do you ever go back to your old books and first books and read them and kind of go, ooh, and want to change them?
In the very first book, there were some things I did that dated the character, and then just due to circumstances, there was about 7 or 8 years between book 1 and book 2. So it aged my character. Now I'm on book 10, and there's a couple ways to approach that. You can, have him get older, or you can ignore it. And I've chosen the more or less ignored phase. I didn't want him to get to be, in his 50s or 60s, still doing the kinds of things he does. I think that kind of, really limits me. So, of course, I feel, not that there's anything wrong with being in your 50s and 60s.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Says the old guy. Yeah, but, I chose to basically ignore it, and I've never got any complaints about that. People just want that next story. They don't really care if you're perfectly true to the calendar. But, some people do that. Michael Connelly is aging Harry Bosch. Harry Bosch has got to be, at least 70 now. And, and his age, and he's showing it.
Gabriel Alon is growing older.
Gabriel Alon is getting.
No, I asked Kyle this at Butcheron and about Mitch, and he goes, he keeps him in the same universe, right? He doesn't have to worry about aging him. So that was specifically. Yeah. So you're in the same boat as that.
That's the way I approach it. Yeah. And, same with Reacher, Jack Reacher. He doesn't really, he's always just Reacher. He doesn't get any older.
Yeah. It's like Joe Goldberg.
Yeah. Look at my profile pics.
He's immortal.
Yeah. You guys are killing me. I can't be immortal.
He's still got it, Well, fascinating book, and writer. We're glad you took the time to come on the show. The book is called Deep Fake, a thriller, and our guest is Ward Larsen. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Ward.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.